Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you again. Thank you for being here in the room, and thank you for being online, checking out this message. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity, this blessing to share with you. And what I want to talk to you about today is new beginnings. Something I often do is go back into my notes from previous talks. And when I did that with the topic of new beginnings, I found that I've probably given this topic more attention than any other single topic in my career as a minister. And apparently it's important that about every 3 years, my thought is, I should talk about new beginnings. So that's what we're talking about today. Certainly we have had this extraordinary thing happen in the world of this pandemic that has caused our lives to change. Some radically, some not so much, but everybody has seen an impact from this. And now that we've been through this for several months and we've had these restrictions on us, things are starting to soften up a little bit. They're starting to say maybe it's time for us to be a little more together and be out a little more than we have been for some time. And what I'm realizing in this thing of finding new beginnings as a conversation that I like to have is that that's about where we are right now. We're at a new beginning. To me, the new beginning comes from the concept of spiritual law that says that as spiritual beings, we are in cycles. And that is, there's actually, some people call it the law of cycles, but to me, it's the same spiritual law, it's just a certain aspect of it. And that aspect brings to us the opportunity to go through phases and then sort of to repeat them. The way I've always imagined it is that we live our lives in sort of an upward expanding spiral. And that we have on that spiral a full circle. And that once we've completed that, we go through another circle of similar things, but we kind of work the things out below, and now we're dealing with it all at a higher level, and we're finding our way to expand our consciousness and to move up in our consciousness so that we don't have to continue doing the same things over and over again. And you might say, well, pandemic isn't about part of that cycle. Well, we're going to talk about that, and I really think that it is. So this idea of spiritual law, the intention of it is, or the thing that I get from knowing that there is spiritual law, is that when we understand it, the more we understand it, the clearer we are about how it works, the more easy our lives become. It's not that our lives are necessarily simplified by it, but certainly they are informed by it. So that when we see that we are actually creating our lives individually and collectively, we have that opportunity to be aware, self-aware enough to change what needs to be changed. Well, do we have the power within us to change a worldwide pandemic? What we have the power to do is change how we're adapting to this, how we're working with this, where we're trying to get with this. And that's what I want to talk to you about today with this idea of new beginnings. And I want to share a quote that I really like by a great spiritual teacher named Dan Millman, who was the one that somebody help me here. He had a great book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Thank you very much, Barbara. Don't tell me her mind isn't working great. He writes this: the world of nature moves in rhythms, patterns, and cycles. The passing of the seasons, the movement of the stars, the ebb and flow of the tides. The seasons do not push one another, neither do clouds race the wind across the sky. All things happen in their own time, rising and falling and rising like ocean waves, the circles of time. We live in a world that has cycles, that has rhythms. And when we become aware of that, we can see as things change and go another direction, to do another thing, that we're not held tightly in having to be the follower all the time. By recognizing how life works, we can adapt to it and we can play with it and play in it in a way that gives us an edge. And not that we're in a competition. I just read that. We're not in a competition with anything. But to be more aware of what's happening allows us to receive it and accept it and modify our understanding along with it so that we're not caught unaware. I remember when this pandemic began, I knew there was something going on. In fact, I mentioned a few weeks ago how my first spiritual teacher told me there would be a time in my life where I would have to stand up strongly in support of the people around me because something cataclysmic was happening in the world. And that crossed my mind very soon as this conversation began about an epidemic in China. I really got the sense that this may have been the thing that my teacher was talking about. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but right now I'm getting that this is a real historical event that we're in the middle of, that it isn't a lightweight thing. However, it's not new. So in the idea of cycles, one element of cycles is that some of them happen to us in our lifetime again and again, and some happen to us as a collective, as a species. Something that may seem like, well, we haven't had anything like this where everything got shut down and where these kind of numbers of people were dying in our lifetime. And that's somewhat true. There hasn't been one like this in our lifetime. But over the course of time, the course of human history, there have been quite a number of these kinds of things. And I want you to know that the research that I've seen shows that in our very DNA, the experiences of our ancestors are recorded. The way we see that the antibodies to this virus show up in those that survive it says that we have the capacity within us to recognize that that is an unwanted visitor in our bodies and that we don't want it, and we create a way to kill it and get rid of it. That's not by chance. It's because we have done this again and again and again. This is a coronavirus. Every one of us has had coronavirus in our bodies. It's called the common cold. This one is just much more highly infectious and has a much greater impact on certain people who are vulnerable to it. But this is not new. This is one of those phases, one of those cycles that is happening in life. And I want to give you some comparison points on all of that. So consider the plagues of human history. Now, these aren't by any means all of them. They're ones that I picked out that I wanted to talk to you about. The first two on this list happened during the Roman Empire. And what you'll see is that even way back at before 200 A.D., a plague took 5 million lives in the Roman Empire. It was called the Anton plague. Not that many years later, 60 years later, the next major plague came, the plague of Cyprian, and that one took actually 30 million lives, mostly in the Roman Empire. If it went beyond that, it wasn't recorded. That's one thing the Romans were really good at, was keeping records. And that looks terrible. 30 million people, 5 million people. There weren't that many people on the planet at the time like there are now. And then the big one came 1,000 years later, a little over 1,000 years later. But this was called the Black Death. It was also called the bubonic plague. I'll get that out. And it happened in the 14th century. And that one, 200 million people died. Very few people had a resistance to it back then. And it did some terrible damage to the population as a whole. And then there were what was called the American plagues. Smallpox was already present in Europe, and when the explorers came from Europe to the Americas, they brought with them many diseases that the people that lived on this planet, the indigenous people, had no resistance to. It says there that 50 million people died. Those people died in Mexico and Central America and down into some parts of South America. 50 million people. That was 90% of the population of the indigenous people. It destroyed the Incan and the Aztec cultures. It ended them and allowed these people from Europe to just come in and pretty much take over. Then in the 19th century, in 1889 to 90, there was the flu pandemic. That was when the influenza was first introduced to people, and we were a little more sophisticated in realizing we couldn't be around people that had it because it was highly contagious, and that ended up killing 1 million people on the planet. And then in the 20th century, the big one that you've probably all heard about, because often COVID is compared to the Spanish flu. That lasted a 3-year period and killed 100 million people. There was an Asian flu in 1957 and 58 that killed 1 million people. And although we don't think about it much, the AIDS epidemic, or actually pandemic, killed 35 million people. That's extraordinary. Then there was, we all remember the swine flu from about 10 years ago that killed 500,000 people worldwide. And where we are with COVID-19 right now is a little over 300,000 people have died worldwide. And of course, that one continues. We seem to have ways of avoiding the AIDS pandemic continuing in a big way, although people still get AIDS today. We just have medicines that can help them stay alive. So what I want to share with you about this, because this is morbid information, this is challenging, and I'm sure no one's sitting in at all excited to hear this, but let me tell you something interesting about this. After each of these, in almost every case, something meaningful happened to the experience of being human on planet Earth that had not been there before that. You can imagine that those first two that are listed there had a great impact on the Roman Empire, and actually it wasn't that long after that that the Roman Empire collapsed. There were many internal and external attacks on the empire and the way it was structured, and that all happened during the time that these plagues were going on. So it weakened it to the point that when it fell, it fell. What it was replaced by was the Christian movement in the world. And even though that wasn't organized the same way, it certainly was organized and ended up having a great impact on the world. Now, one may say that's a good thing, some may say not. At the time, though, it seemed like something that was worth considering. Because in the early days of the Christian church, the thing that was so wonderful about it was people that were Christians got along pretty well. And that was kind of new to the world. After the Black Death, what emerged after all those that died during those years that was part of what was called the Dark Ages, what arose was the Renaissance period, where art and aesthetics and music became important, and the whole culture of Europe and the world really opened up in a way it had never done before. The priorities of people changed. People saw value in life the way they had never seen before. And that, of course, was the largest plague in history. Let's keep it that way. But these other plagues also had following them some things that really kind of helped. If you look at even with 90% of the people, the indigenous people of Central America and Mexico actually being killed through this, 90%, the 10% that remained actually integrated with the explorers that came in and created a whole new culture that speaks Spanish but is largely indigenous in nature. So that merging actually created a way for that culture to redefine itself. And then I want to skip down to the AIDS pandemic. As horrible as that was, what I believe came out of that was an opportunity to accept homosexuality as a reasonable way for someone to live their life. We kind of got off this thing, at least not everybody, of course, but as a culture, we've moved to a place where the idea of it being a sin or being wrong has been set down, and people are allowed to love whoever they want to love. And I believe that really came out of the AIDS experience. So as often happens when something very dark and deep happens that seems so morbid and so counterintuitive, shows up in our world, something follows it that's even better. And I believe that we have an opportunity as a faith community in the science of mind to play an important role in how we redefine ourselves after this pandemic. This may well be our opportunity to share with the world how much we have to say and how much we have to the creation of our lives. That life does not happen to us, it happens through us based on our consciousness. That's where we're looking. That's what we can see. The native people of this nation, of North America certainly, are aware of that. They're aware of this idea of cycles. This picture you're looking at is a representation of what's called the Native American medicine wheel. and from it, we learn that there are different aspects of life. There's a movement in life that moves from the east, starting in the east, which is that place of new beginnings, that moves from that place of new beginnings into the south, which is the place where we recognize family and love relationships and expansion. So we move from the beginnings of setting an understanding of who we are into that idea of actually creating an expanded experience of life. And what follows that, which is in the lower left there, would be the West. And the West is the place where people face their dragons, where they face their fears, where they face the things that limit them, and they open up to the possibility that something greater is going on. From that place, we understand better who we are. We don't understand who we are when everything is just moving along nicely and everybody's okay, and we're just, our biggest grumbles are that the price of eggs went up. But when things seem to shatter and crumble around us, we're called to remember the truth, and that's what we do in the West. And I would suggest right now, we are in the West, moving toward the North, and the North is the place of understanding. It's the place where the elders sit. It's the place of wisdom. It's the place of understanding that there are greater things going on than we can see in the moment. And that's the essence of wisdom. So this pandemic certainly is in the West. And as we move into that wisdom and begin to understand it, we will begin building a new world which will take us back into the East. So as we stand in the West, as we complete our work in the West, and we move into that greater understanding, we are preparing to create a different world. Since this began, I've been saying that we are not going back to the world we knew. Something different is happening. Something greater is happening. Will it happen immediately? Of course not. It's going to take some time. And there's going to be hardships. And there's going to be more confusion. And there's going to be resistance. But a new world will emerge. It has to. It always has. And it always will. So I'm grateful to the Native people for sharing that wisdom and helping us find our way back to the East so that we can begin again. This is a quote from Eckhart Tolle that I think applies very well to this idea of cycles and of new beginnings. There are cycles of success when things come to you and you thrive, and cycles of failure when things wither and disintegrate, and you have to let go in order to make room for new things to arise or for transformation to happen. If you cling and resist at that point, it means you are refusing to go with the flow of life, and you will suffer. It is not true that the up cycle is good and the down cycle is bad, except in the mind's judgment. Growth is considered positive, but nothing can grow forever. Dissolution is needed for growth to happen. One cannot exist without the other. So we're in a perfect place. We're doing exactly what is ours to do. We're understanding according to this idea of cycles and flow in life. Everything's okay. Yes, people will die. But you know what? Everybody's going to do that anyway. We've all done it. How many times, I don't know. I happen to believe that we live more than one life. So the idea of dying can't be the greatest thing that we focus on here. There's something greater going on. It hasn't been defined yet. It hasn't been revealed yet. But it's there. And it's our job to see it. And it's our job to know who we are as we engage this in the new world that is emerging. That is our work. That is the thing that we seek to do, the place that we seek to go. That's what's important for us right now in our lives. So we've gone through lots over the years. We've gone through many new beginnings. We've gone through much turmoil. We have, our ancestors have, and yes, we're evolving, but not to the point where this isn't a relative part of who we are as human beings on planet Earth, as spiritual beings on planet Earth. It's still a process. And it's still unfolding. And I invite you in your life to see this as an opportunity to recreate yourself, to express yourself in a new way. in a way that you are blessed by touching others. You just never know how that's going to work. But we must be prepared because life's not going to wait for us. And this isn't time off. This is our time to reevaluate our lives and to see what's working and to let go of the rest and to recreate ourselves in this new image of the divine. That's what's unfolding. That's what we seek to understand. And this is why we're here. We're here at this moment in history to do this good work, to awaken ourselves and all those around us that are willing to wake up to a better world. And when we can see it, we can share it with everyone around us. So I want to give you an example of why I say these are not necessarily the worst of times. People are stressed, absolutely. But we've never had a time where we didn't have this much information, maybe too much information coming to us. But we have the ability to make our choices much more informed than we ever have, than any generation before us ever could do. We don't have to blindly trust anyone in the world. We can make our own choices. We can find our own way. And good things are happening around us all the time. So I invite you to let go of any idea that this is a deeply dark time. It doesn't have to be. This could be a point of awakening that changes everything for everyone on the planet. And even though people keep saying we want to get back to where we were, that's not the goal. The goal is to see the new world that is emerging and to live from that place. And in the midst of all that, good things continue to happen. Even with all the fear and concern and confusion in the world is working. Spring happened. It was beautiful. The trees and the shrubs and the bulbs, they didn't care about COVID-19. They were doing just fine. Of course, they're not impacted by it, but not even any empathy for us and what we're having to go through. They're doing fine. And I want to just tell you one little story that I was asked to bring to you today. A couple of weeks ago, there was a red pickup that pulled into the parking lot. And I happened to be out over by my house, and I saw it pull in, and it went over and parked near the creek bank. And we have a number of people that come and park out there, so I wasn't at all concerned. But after the truck had sat there for a little while, I said, well, I'm going to go over and say hi. So I drove over, and I pulled up next to the red truck in my truck, and I rolled down my window. And I said, hi, can I help you? And a man sitting in the truck looked over at me. And he said, last week I came here. I was going to kill myself. But your dog saved my life. So our little lab, who kind of owns this place, went out and greeted that man like she greets everybody that comes here, with her tail wagging and that smile on her face, and caused him to realize there was something to live for. I asked him how he was doing. He said he was still struggling, but he was still breathing too. And I wished him well and told him he'd come over and see Bliss anytime he'd like. Just a couple of days ago, he was in the parking lot, and I left him alone, and he was pulling out as I was in my parking space, and he stopped for a moment, and I said, how you doing? He says, maybe a little better. Where's Bliss? I said, well, I think she's taking a nap over at the house, but I'll tell her you asked for her. And he smiled and pulled away. One life. Certainly a life worth saving. Certainly a life worth living. All of our lives are worth living. And we all have things to do. We have a deeper understanding to embrace and to understand and to embody. We have people who are counting on us, whether we know it or not. So I invite us all to continue to stand strong and to be preparing ourselves to step into a new beginning like we've never known, and to create a new world that is better than any world that has ever been. I love you. I bless you. And I know all is good because all is God. And so it is. Thank you. So before we go, I want to remind you that we are very open to receiving the blessing of your financial support, that we are doing fine under the circumstances. Obviously, our expenses are much lower than they have been, and our income is lower too, but we're doing fine. Everything is working. So because of you that support this center, we are able to continue preparing for our reopening and knowing that all is well as we do this good work. And I invite you to send us something through the mail or through our website, however you'd like to do it, and tell us how this that we're doing is supporting you, if it is, and if there's anything else that we can do to support you. And by doing that, we'll be back together before you know it. So we're going to repeat our investment affirmation together aloud so that we continually know that this is the truth of our giving. I freely and joyously give from the abundance and fullness of my overflowing wealth, knowing my gift goes with love as it touches and blesses the world. And so it is. Yeah, and so it is. Have a wonderful week. Take care of yourself. Be strong, be clear, and know who you are. Thank you.